This is video 13 of my new How to Make series here on Sonic Academy. I am Jimbo JTech, and today I am going to talk to you about preparing your mostly finalized track for mastering, something that we often overlook. We either can overcook things ourselves by creating a mix that has mastering switched on throughout the process, or we can inadvertently create a great sounding stereo mix that doesn't stand up well to mastering. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you about a few different techniques that you can employ to basically make sure that you're looking at your track from all the different angles, making sure nothing's sticking its neck out, and that you can deliver it to your mastering engineer in a way that they are going to be able to work with in a really easy and flowing way. So let's dive in. All right, we are almost there. All of our parts are in place. The arrangement has taken shape, and we've done just a reasonable amount of processing to really get everything sitting where we want it to sit. And, you know, like I said, a lot of that process was built into the sound selection. It was built into the volume so that when we did reach for that processing, we can just use a little splash of it here and there, and it doesn't have to wrestle with the sounds too much to make them all work. So, the last thing that's going to happen to this song before it, feasibly comes out and hits the market is that it's going to go through a mastering engineer. The mastering engineer's job, first and foremost, is to listen to it as somebody who isn't you, who hasn't seen this whole project from the inside, and they don't really, they couldn't write out the list of the 100 tracks that you've got in there. They're only hearing the whole thing as one, basically like merged together block of audio, and they're viewing it from the outside of the creative process. And most importantly, they're viewing it from the outside of you, because you are inside this and it's wrapped around you. And that's where you should be as the producer or as the mixer. So the mastering engineer comes from the outside, and they look at it and, and sort of just compare it to everything else that's happening on the market, frequency wise, and where things are hitting and how things are flowing and how the energy is and how the loudness is. And then they're getting it ready for prime time. They're sort of like an editor who's just making sure that, you don't have anything sticking its neck out. If you did happen to send them a pre-master where the hats were too loud, they can catch that and pull back on those frequencies a little bit in the final song, and then sort of put it in the oven so it's ready to go and ready to be consumed by the public. So while we're creating the song, it's good to get our entire track into a state where the mastering engineer can sort of listen to it and see what you're going for. So to that end, you do want to send a reference master if you can. People often put mastering plugins on the master track when they're creating the song, and this can lead to a lot of headaches. So it's interesting because if you do everything completely dry on the master, it is easier to hear what needs to be fixed. It's easier to troubleshoot mix problems and to get the mix sounding balanced and correct with nothing on the master. But if you never have anything on this master output at all throughout the whole process of the song, you can actually get a pre-master that sounds nice but doesn't lend itself very well to mastering. So what we actually want to do is bring in a sense of flexibility where this track plays back nicely, in an unmastered state where everything's got more room to breathe and there's a lot more headroom, as well as in a mastered state where it's being compressed, especially if it's being, played in a club where the compressors in the club are a bit strong, or it's being played on the radio where there's a lot of radio squish. So the first thing that I'll do is create a stress test compressor. And what this is going to do is, put this song in some, real world settings where it's going to be sort of pushed a little bit too hard. So, generally speaking, mastering compressors have slightly higher attacks, but this one's got quite a short one. And the release I'm going to keep about, what it normally would be for a song like this, which is, probably somewhere in this range, but it really depends on what effect you're going for. So I'm going to turn off the makeup on this compressor just so it doesn't, automatically increase the volume and blow your eardrums. So what I want you to do when you're making your track throughout the entire process, because, you know, the mix does sort of happen throughout the entire process, is I want you to switch this on and off at times. And like I said, you can sort of, you know, it's like these dials are almost both pointing to 12 o'clock. So if that's how you want to remember it, you know, as a starting point, right? Now what happens is if something is weighing the mix down, like we talked about in previous videos, it tends to become really apparent when the whole mix is being put under pressure like this. Like if the sub bass is too loud, a very common problem in a mix. You'll get a sense, or say if the kick is too loud, you'll get a sense for things overpowering the mix under these conditions because there isn't really room for them to do so when you've got this strong compression on the overall mix. Hear how I turned that kick up and, you know, it was obviously overpowering the mix, and I pulled back on it and the rest of the music sort of came through and could breathe a bit more. So, what I want you to do is just have this periodically switching on and off throughout the entire process. And what that will do is it'll make you craft the whole song in such a way that it works under that hard compression, you know, under these very strong compression settings, as well as without them. So, you know, that's a way to sort of make your whole mix compression proof. But you also want the mix to work really, really well without it. Because when people make the whole song with mastering switched on, you switch that off and send it to the mastering engineer, and you're actually sending them a bit of a deflated mix, a bit of an undercooked mix. I usually have some sub frequencies soloed, and I just want to listen to how the bass frequencies sound by themselves. That's the sort of, you know, you're in the green room backstage at the club, and the main room's sound is coming through the walls. If you've got an imbalance between the kick and the sub, or something isn't right in the bass, or you've got some really resonant frequencies happening in the bass, or the kick is too slow and needs to have some of its super low end scooped out, this is where you're going to really be able to just zoom in on those frequencies and hear it. So you might solo out those frequencies and it might sound like this. And you might have to pull back on those frequencies to make things feel balanced. So that's a good way to just do a last minute, you know, bass check. If you're doing that, I recommend after you do that, take, you know, just step away from the DAW for 5 minutes after doing it, because then when you play everything back together, it sounds like it's had the bass removed from it. I've talked about this in a previous video, but just quickly, this is my sort of 80s white EQ preset. It's got, you know, a sort of slightly bumped resonant, but 12, not 24, high pass filter there, and a little boost around 2K, which is sort of emulating those Yamaha NS10s, gives you, which people used to mix on, you know, and a lot of the world's, you know, most, you know, famous records are mixed on. Hi-fi speakers from the 80s that, you know, were designed for home listening and were a total flop, but then people discovered they were the perfect, you know, addition to anyone's studio, because they give you a real sense of the focus of the song that people are going to hear when they're listening on phones and car stereo. Well, not phones back then, but, you know, certainly like small stereo systems. And nowadays, you know, it's listening to sort of how the song's going to sound on smaller systems like laptop speakers and things like that. So that can be useful with volume adjustments as well. If you're on speakers, which I recommend you try and be at some point, even if you are a predominantly headphone mixer, I'll usually have mono and coming out of one speaker and use this for reference. And this will help me, you know, determine if some elements are too close to me in the mix and need to be pulled back. So that's, you know, this stress test of like, you know, how does the song sound when everything is coming from one point source? Sounds a bit weird on headphones, I know. If you're on headphones, it's probably better to just keep it in the center. But if you are on speakers, it's good to have it mono out of one speaker. At various points. So all of these things we're switching on and off throughout the song so that the mix is cool with whatever that you throw at it. When it comes time to send it off, you do want to send a rough master so the mastering engineer has some idea of the settings that you would dial in. Even though you might not necessarily be like a pro, they sort of get an idea of how you want it to sound. So when you're doing that, switch back on this stress test compressor, and this is one of the last things I do in the mix. Then just ease back on everything a little bit. Until that gain reduction is barely moving. So you're just sort of relaxing that compressor. And there's your mastering compression for your test master, for your home master. And that's basically, it's putting a splash of compression on the mix in a way that isn't going to like totally nuke it for demoing purposes. And then a simple limiter. And, once again, this is something that you can switch on and off throughout the process if you want, until you hit your desired sort of levels. I'm not going to pull back on those levels too much right now. Because it's going to make it super loud. But generally speaking, if you're sending it for demo purposes, or you're sending it, to a label or to a mastering engineer, don't worry too much about squeezing the max loudness out of it. Just get it like loud enough, and that should be fine. It's better to have it a bit quieter for everyone to listen to rather than having it pushed too hard. So those are some of the techniques I use to just get this track ready to be, finalized by the mastering engineer before it goes to press. So that's pretty much everything. In the next video, I'm going to give just some final thoughts on the whole thing. I'm going to go over a couple of elements of this creation process that weren't covered in the individual videos thus far. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the lessons that I learned from doing this project and, best practices for next time. So stay tuned.